There was a moment in time where God had given them lots of different trees in the garden Adam and Eve could pick from. In fact, many tell us that there were probably thousands of trees for them to pick from. And God said, I want you to keep 2 to trust me with. I want you to not eat from 2 of these, because if you eat of those trees, you'll surely die. First was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, a lot of people say, what kind of fruit was it? Was it an apple? Was it an orange? We don't know. The reality is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what fruit. God said to Eve, don't pick it, and she picked it. By the way, guys, ladies have been struggling on what to eat. That decision went bad from the very beginning, right? So it's a constant struggle. But let me tell you something. It wasn't about the fruit. It was about the decision. They chose to define what was good and evil on their own terms the moment they saw the fruit was good to eat. They saw that it was something that you would desire to make one wise. Like, they wanted it. They wanted to define what was right on their own terms. By the way, we haven't wandered from that moment. We all want to define what is good and what is evil on our own terms as well. And so from Adam and Eve, from that point, God said, you can't be here. You now are going to, by the way, sin has consequences. Don't you realize that sin has consequences? And so God says, hey, listen, I love you, but our relationship has changed. You can no longer walk in my presence as you are filled with sin. By the way, how many sins does it take you to be a sinner? It takes one, right? And so rather than comparing whose sin is worse, right? Let's just come back to the fact that it wasn't about the fruit, it was about their decision. And so the moment they made that decision, God pushes them out of the garden. By the way, you cannot separate God's love from God's justice. God is filled with love, but God is filled with justice. By the way, just as you would not want to separate the justice of a father who would get angry at someone who would hit or kill or maim his child, he should be angry if he loves that child. By the way, God's love cannot be separated from his justice. He is all justice, all true, all right, but he is also all loving, all grace-filled, all compassionate. So when he tells Adam and Eve to leave the garden, he has these 2 angels that have these fiery swords, and they're basically showing that they have separated themselves from God. So once God shows that there's a separation between man and him, now there has to be a reconnection. And so God gives this wonderful promise to not just to Adam and Eve, but also to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, that one would come through their line. By the way, his name was Jesus. And Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, was giving this promise that not my will but thine be done. Great drops of blood was falling on the dirt of that Garden of Gethsemane, showing that Jesus was the connection point back into God's presence, back to walking and talking with God like Adam and Eve got to walk and talk with God. So now we have an ability, the way to get back into God's presence. Now here's why this is so important. Because the reason I believe Jesus, right after he dined with the disciples, and by the way, he wants to dine with you. He says that. In Revelation 3:20, he says, I stand at the door and knock. If any man will answer, he'll come in, he'll dine with you, he'll sup with you. He wants relationship with you. But let me tell you something. After he had that Last Supper, in John chapter 14 and verse number 31, he said, arise. We're going to walk. We're going to take a walk. And he takes them through that wonderful, last week we saw it, and if you weren't there last week and you want to jump online and get the whole context for the gardener and all of the grapes and the vine, and he's the vine, we are the branches, and he takes them through that vineyard. And he starts to basically walk and talk with them like he had walked and talked with Adam and Eve. He was abiding with them, and they were abiding with him. And he walks them right into the Garden of Gethsemane, and from the Garden of Gethsemane, he's betrayed, and from that garden, he goes and he's hung on a cross, and he dies for you and for me.